Hey guys, welcome back. So I feel like I say this every single wrap up, but I cannot believe that the month is already over. That seems to be the trend for 2020, honestly, but you know, here we are. It's already November, only 2 more months until a totally fresh year, and I for one am ready for the reset. But anyway, let's talk about the books that I read in October because it was another good reading month for me. I chipped a little bit off of my fall TBR, if you guys remember that I said I was going to do one of those, and even the books that I didn't necessarily read that were on my TBR, I did end up getting a lot of like spooky, paranormal-y, thriller type reads for the Halloween season. So in total I ended up reading 9 books, and as usual, let's go ahead and talk about them. Okay, so let's start off talking about the in-depth books that I read this month. As you guys know, I have been taking part of the in-depth read-along for the entire year, and every month I've been reading, or at least trying to read, anywhere from like 1 to 4 of the books in the series. There are a total of like 50. I think the 50th one just came out this year, and so needless to say, I've got a hell of a backlist to get through. So this month I ended up reading 3 of them: Portrait in Death, Reunion in Death, and Purity in Death. So those are 14, 15, and 16, and I really enjoyed all of them. So as usual, I feel like these kind of need to be read in order. There are a couple of exceptions. I think last month I gave you guys a recommendation for one of the books in the series that you didn't have to read in order. I feel like it was a standout. As far as the ones that I read this month though, I do think since there was a lot of character development that they are better off read in order for you to have like the backstory. And the reason that I really enjoyed the 3 that I read this month was because of the backstories. Now, of course, each individual book has its individual case that is specific to that one standalone story, but you've got that like interwoven interwoven character development throughout the stories, and that's why I really loved it. So in one of the books, we get to meet Peabody's family, which I think was absolutely adorable. She comes from a family of free agers, which are kind of like, I don't want to necessarily say like hippies, maybe more closer to like Mormons in the sense to where they, you know, are very loving, very free-spirited, all that jazz. But anyway, we get to meet her parents, which was awesome. In another of the books, we get to see more of Peabody and McNabb's relationship, which is another one of the cops that they work with. And oh my gosh, there was a touching scene. I don't want to give anything away, but there was definitely a touching scene between the 2 of them. And it's just good to see like Peabody coming out of her shell and forging a relationship, being able to like stand on her own as she becomes a better cop. And in the last book that I read, which I believe let me check my phone. I believe it's Portrait in Death. Yes, so Portrait in Death, I ended up giving that one 4 stars. It was standout for the simple fact that we get Rourke's backstory, at least more of his backstory, which, you know, up until this point, we know kind of, you know, why he is the way he is, but we get so much more in this one. So if you are a fan of these books, if you've read them and you maybe haven't gotten to this particular book yet, which is book 16, definitely check it out. It's a real standout one for sure. Okay, so next up I read A Haven Point Beginning by RaeAnne Thayne. I have been wanting to get into her books for a long time. She writes very heartwarming Christmas stories. I know that's what she's really popular for. That's why I wanted to read her. But when I found out she actually had a novella kind of introducing or kicking off the Haven Point series as a whole, I figured that would be the perfect way for me to get an introduction to her, and I was not at all disappointed. I absolutely adore this book. It was so sweet, so charming. Obviously, since it's a novella, it was shorter, but I think it was the perfect length to introduce you to the world, essentially. So in this one, basically, we are following our main heroine, who is, I want to say, going on a hike or returning on a hike when she gets stuck in a avalanche, and literally a hero comes along on a horse to rescue her. But because they are snowed in, they actually have to go back to his place to wait out the storm. And it's from there that they kind of get to know each other. She has original misconceptions about him, and you know, he's just looking to make sure that she feels safe and protected, since technically he's a stranger. But anyway, I really loved it. I'm not necessarily one to automatically love or hate the kind of like snowed in or forced proximity romances, but this one I think was done very well, and especially for it being a novella, I think it was done well because, as we know, you don't really have a lot of time to you know, show all of the characters' backstory and all of that, but I feel like in this one I had a really good understanding of who they were, and again, an introduction to the Haven Point series. So since the actual first book after this novella prequel is set around Christmas time, I do plan on reading it, and I'm super excited about it. Yes, okay, so these next two books I was single-handedly influenced by Francesca from Under the Covers book blog, because she posted a pull quote from the second book in this series that was so tempting. Like I ended up messaging her and I'm like, what book is that from? I need to know immediately, because it was like, I don't even know, like steamy and compelling. If I wasn't already in between books, I surely would have dropped the book that I was reading to pick this one up, because that's how compelling it was. So anyway, the series that I'm talking about is the Stay a Spell series by Juliette Cross, and it actually has two books. I've read both of them this month because, hello, they're fantastic. The first one is called Wolfgang Wilde, and the second one is Don't Hex and Drive. And I have to be honest, a lot of people like the second book more, which, you know, technically I really was pulled into the series because of a quote from the second book, but the first book is really my personal favorite. So basically what we've got in both books is a shared world where we are following a set of witch sisters. Each book follows a specific sister, and you know, it is a paranormal romance. So you know, their trials and tribulations as a witch, and then also them finding love. Okay, so in Wolfgang Wilde, which again, the first book, personally my favorite of the two, we are following a witch sister named Evie and a wolf named Matteo, or a wolf shifter rather. And I thought the premise was super interesting because Matteo is unable to shift into his wolf form, and because that is something that is part of him, it's physically hurting not to be able to shift. He doesn't know if it's like psychological, if he has some kind of curse put on him, and so that's why he ends up going to Evie, because she is a witch who breaks curses basically, and he's desperate, even though technically wolves kind of stay to themselves and witches and wolves don't really get along together. He really needs help, and so he ends up going to her, and she offers to help him. And because of the way that they have to get to the bottom of figuring out what his curse is, they end up having to spend a lot of time together, and it's from there that they forge a relationship. One would actually say that it's a friends to lovers relationship, because she doesn't really have any animosity towards him, even though technically wolves and witches aren't supposed to necessarily mingle with one another. And I just absolutely love their chemistry. They had excellent banter. She's kind of like this comic book geek, you know, kind of not like other girls kind of girl, if that makes any kind of sense, but not in an annoying way. I actually really enjoyed her character because she also kind of, I guess, blossomed into her own, because having a lot of sisters, she sometimes felt insecure about her specific powers, and so being able to help Matteo helps her realize, you know, just how powerful she is and all of that jazz. But anyway, the thing that I love most about the book was that there was an internal monologue between Matteo and his wolf, who he names Alpha, and obviously this conversation is like happening in his head because his wolf is trapped within him, but they are two completely different characters, and having them argue with one another was so entertaining to see play out. I think that's one of the reasons why it was my favorite, also because of the premise, because again, I've read enough paranormal, even I'm not an expert, but I've read enough to where I'd say that having a wolf unable to shift is a unique plot point. And so I think that that gave this book a lot of brownie points. Now, one thing I did want to kind of point out, and this is not at all a detriment to the book, just an observation, but both of the books in the series, I was totally misled by the covers. Don't get me wrong, the covers are absolutely adorable, but when you look at them, I thought I was in for kind of like a super fluffy, kind of fun paranormal, and technically that's what you get. It is fun, but it's not at all fluffy. There is a lot more depth. There is a lot more steam, and I think that's kind of what threw me off, because I'm in no means a prude or anything, but I just wasn't expecting it, judging it by the cover. And I know you're not supposed to judge books by the cover, but let's be honest, we all do that. And regardless, I'm super glad that I read this one. Now, let's talk about the other one, which is Don't Hex and Drive. In this one, we are following another one of the sisters, and instead of it being a werewolf counterpart, the hero is actually a vampire, a very strong vampire, a very luxurious vampire, because technically he's like a Bollywood star, and he comes into town as a favor for one of his other vampire friends, and he ends up accidentally hitting one of the witch sisters on her bike as she's, pedaling down the street or whatever, and he tries to make it up for her. He's, super sorry, blah, blah, blah. And this one I would say is actually more enemies to lovers, though I guess that's not technically correct. So enemies to lover in the sense to where the sister, or excuse me, the heroine in this one has a grudge against him for some reason or the other, and he just is like begging for forgiveness constantly. He's compelled to her, but she wants nothing to do with him. And I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't enjoy this one as much. Don't get me wrong, it was hot, it was entertaining, blah, 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 but I think that the sister was, I don't want to say unlikable, but she was kind of mean, There were plenty of times where she would snap at the hero and kind of, ward off his advances and all of that. And when she first gets hit by him, obviously you're going to be upset. You have a complete right to be, but immediately he apologizes. He's nice to her friends, he's nice to her family, and she keeps saying that she's not a mean person, but her actions say otherwise, in the way that she snaps at him constantly and just has such an attitude for no reason. And I think that just bothered me on a whole, because she just kept emphasizing how she wasn't this bad person, but it's like, sis, you're kind of being a bitch right now. What's happening? But anyway, other than that, I really enjoyed it. Again, their chemistry was good, and I really liked the hero. I preferred him more than the heroine, actually. As I mentioned, he is a Bollywood star, so naturally he looks really good. There's this really funny scene where he teases her by sending her one of his Bollywood movies where he's like shirtless and, the hunk of the movie, and she tries not to watch it, but she comes home one day and like all of her sisters are watching it, and they're like fanning themselves and just like, oh my god, he's so hot. And of course she's mortified, but like I said, both books were entertaining. It was just that the first book was more my personal favorite. Okay, so continuing the paranormal trend, I read a novella called Hallowe'en Boo, which I don't even remember how I found this one. Actually, no, I do remember. One of the romance bookstagrammers that I follow on Instagram posted a story about this premise, and it was super intriguing. And since it's a novella, I knew I had to check it out because it seemed kind of wild, and the sense that it was unbelievable. But in this one, we have basically a woman who is being haunted by a ghost that's living in her apartment, and the two of them end up hooking up. That was the premise that I got from the Instagram story and from the teaser of the book. However, when you actually read the book, it's a little bit more plausible, or at least the author does a good job of making it more plausible. But basically what happens is, yes, there is a woman living in an apartment who has a ghost residing in it. The ghost happens to be a young male, obviously, and he has, in a sense, fallen in love with her over the past, I don't know, year or couple of years that she has been living in this apartment. And what's funny is that she kind of is aware that there is a ghost in her apartment. At first she was freaked out, but then it has come to be more of a comfort to her. And so, you know, at this point she kind of like talks out loud to him when she's about to leave. Obviously, she doesn't know that it's a guy. She doesn't know that it's a young guy or anything, but she just knows that there's a presence living in her house. And so one evening, she is at home alone, and she has what she thinks is a sexy dream, but in fact, it's actually the ghost, like, using his spectral aura, I guess, to pleasure her. I don't know if that's necessarily correct. I'm trying to think of how the author described it, but basically that ends up happening. And so one night on Halloween, to be more specific, ghosts in this world apparently are able to turn into, you know, non-see-through human beings. And so he figures he would use this opportunity to declare his love for her, since he will be able to touch her, to speak, blah, blah, blah. And so that's basically what he does. He comes to life on Halloween, and the two of them end up having like one magical day together. And she's super bummed out that when Halloween ends, he goes back into ghost form. But I won't give any more away at this point, but let's just say that it actually ends in a happy ending. I was not expecting it. Again, I was really impressed with the author for a couple of reasons. One, to get across such a story in a novella form. I'm always impressed when authors are able to tell compelling stories in novella form because of such a, you know, character limit restriction. And then also somehow making this implausible plotline plausible and have a happy ending, because when I was first reading the book, I thought, you know, there's no way, it's a ghost. Whatever's going to happen between them, it's going to be stupid and ridiculous. And that was actually not in fact the case. And so again, I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised. And so I would recommend it to anybody who loves paranormal romance. I think that it was a fun one. I thought that it was interesting. I hadn't read anything like it before. And so yeah, definitely impressed. Okay, so this next book was actually my least favorite of the month, and that was Agatha Christie's Halloween Party. I know, I'm just so saddened to not like this book by Agatha Christie, but you know what? They can't all be winners. Naturally, I wanted to read this one because of the whole Halloween spirit, but I was a little bit disappointed. Well, more than a little bit disappointed, because I ended up giving it 2 stars. But basically the premise of this one, which I have to say is actually pretty dark for a Christie novel. I would actually expect this plotline to be more of a Nordic noir plot. But anyway, what ends up happening is that there is a Halloween party, and it's kind of for like teenagers. So most of the people there are, you know, preteens or teens or what have you. And one of the teens ends up dead. She was murdered via drowning because there was like a bopping for apples game. And so one of the women there ends up calling Hercule Poirot, asking for his help to try and figure out what happened to this girl. You know, he does his usual deduction thing, but there's actually also a second murder of a child, which again, to me, that's kind of a dark theme for Christie, but you know, I haven't read all of her works. Maybe it happens in another book, but I was kind of surprised by that. And he does his whole deduction thing, trying to figure out who wanted this girl dead, the motives behind it, blah, blah, blah. The reason that I was disappointed in this one was, I guess, because of Hercule Poirot's process in this one. Now, don't get me wrong, there have been Agatha Christie stories before where the murder takes place with a completely separate group of characters, and then Poirot is brought in. But in this one, I felt he was just too detached from it. You know, like the woman calls him up one evening and he goes there, tries to figure things out, blah, blah, blah. And I just wasn't buying the fact that he was able to solve the murder without having talk to people as much as he did in this. And I say that in that he didn't really talk to enough people, I feel like. Sometimes I feel like his deductions are a bit of a stretch, and this was a perfect example. And then, to be honest, I just thought it was just a little boring, you know, like other than Poirot obviously being the main character that we are familiar with, the woman who called him, the other outside characters who were at this party, they were just kind of boring, and I'm just like, I could take it or leave it. So unfortunately, I gave this one 2 stars. I am glad I read it just because of the like Halloween theme, but unless you are a die-hard Christie fan, I would steer clear from this one, honestly. Like, if you are wanting to read Agatha Christie, don't start with this one. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, last up, talk about Third Time's a Charm, because I read a third Ruth Ware book. I read In a Dark, Dark Wood, and you know what? I didn't hate it. If you guys saw my video, I want to say a couple of weeks ago, where I was talking about audiobooks that I hated and whether or not I would have liked them if I read them, Ruth Ware was on that list because I listened to A Death of Mrs. Westaway and I thought it was just like awful boring, and I thought that I would give another chance to her, a third chance, or maybe fourth, a third chance. And the only reason I was compelled to pick this book up is because one of my friends wanted to buddy read it. We wanted to buddy read some kind of thriller. I gave her a choice, and this is the book that she ended up going with. And you know, again, I didn't hate it. Now, what's really interesting about this is that the premise, so how do I put this to words? There were more positives than negatives about this book, but I'm still torn because the one negative is so large. And let me explain what I mean by that. So it was, very fast paced. It was very compelling. I read it in like only 2 or 3 days because I couldn't put it down. It was very ominous. You know, it takes place at a house that is described as very creepy. It was a very well done atmospheric book. However, the thing that I did not like about it were the characters. This has been probably one of a handful of times where I could not stand not only the main character, but any of them. I hated them all. Now, I don't know if Ruth Ware did this on purpose. I'm thinking that she did make all of these characters unlikable so that they can kind of be red herrings as to trying to figure out which one of them committed the murder. So if that's the case, she did a damn good job because she was very successful. I didn't like any of them. But at the same time, it's very hard for me to separate characters from the premise or the overall book. Not saying that every book that I read have to have characters that I love and can imagine being best friends with or put myself in their shoes, but at the same time I have to at least empathize enough with them to walk along with them on this journey, this plot, and that just wasn't the case with this one. Now obviously I did keep reading, but I just had to really clench down on the fact that I didn't like any of them. So let me back up really quickly to tell you what this book is about. So basically what happens is that it is a hen's night. I guess that is the British term for a bachelorette party, and it's taking place at this grand glass house in the middle of nowhere, basically in the middle of the woods. And so what we have are a group of friends who come together, and at the end of the night somebody ends up dying, and so we get the book from alternating timelines, one from as we see this bachelorette party playing along, and then the other one is the main female heroine who we are kind of seeing the story in her eyes. She is at the hospital having been in a horrible car accident, and she's trying to remember what happened leading up to the accident. So we've got an unreliable narrator in this woman, which is also, if you are a fan of unreliable narrators and atmospheric thrillers, this book is definitely one that I would recommend. But I didn't like the heroine. I didn't like the group of women, and there's one guy technically that she was with. But again, I think that was done on purpose because as these people get together, scars from the past have, opened up again. And what we really see are people reverting back to who they were, 10, 15 years ago, which people claim that they've changed and all of that, but clearly that's not true because of the way that they act once they get together again. So that said, I ended up giving this book 3 stars, which was very hard to do. Those middle of the road books sometimes are really hard to judge because definitely giving it a 4 on the atmospheric, compelling, all of that. But I want to give it a 2 I don't want to say a 1. I want to give it a 2 when it comes to the characters because I didn't like them. But that's totally biased. So there you have it. I guess the average comes to a 3, but it's still one that I would recommend, which is very weird, and it's still one that is memorable. So it's not like a middle of the road, I'm gonna forget this kind of 3-star, but just more so I have so many mixed feelings that I have to give this book 3 stars because depending on which day I'm talking about it, I could either really love it or hate it. Okay, so there you have it. That is my wrap up for the month. I read some like Halloween-y, spooky season type books, which I'm really proud of myself for because I was trying to get into the Halloween spirit of things, and I think I did a good job accomplishing that. So now we are going to move into November. The book that I'm currently reading now is a Nordic noir, so I'm in the mood for something like really dark, and I'll probably balance that out with some Christmas books if I'm being honest, just because I have been dying for Christmas to come along, and I'm one who celebrates it super early, so I have been trying to hold on as long as possible before I crack open Christmas books. But now that Halloween is over, I'm gonna go ahead and start. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you've read any of these, and if so, what you thought about them, especially with the Ruth Ware book, because again, middle of the road, and I feel like I need to talk through it with someone. Me and my girlfriend are actually supposed to be having a chat about it later next week, so I'll probably be able to get all of my feelings out again about that book. But anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Happy reading. Bye!